Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I'm going to start talking about my first pieces that I made around the border. I'm from the small town called Tecate in Baja California. If you're not familiar with this geography, it's next to Tijuana. Tijuana is next to San Diego in California. So in one of my first video works, I was interested in the fact that the U.S. Border Patrol constantly monitors not only the border itself, but also the daily life and the city on the Mexican side. Through their observation, the Border Patrol becomes aware how people behave and what they do during day and night, simply due to the point of view where they park their trucks 24/7. Avenida Mexico, which is this video, well, these are still images from the video, is the last street at the edge of Tecate, next to the border with the United States. My purpose in the video was to emulate what the border agents do all day, but from the Mexican side, gazing at the landscape of Tecate while seated. By climbing onto the roof of a house, I reached the height of the hill where they usually sit, first with my back against the Border Patrol and describing the scenery. Then I rotate the chair and face the agents. I sought to create a silent dialogue with something that has already become part of the everyday border landscape. What we know is there, but we no longer see. Or what we see and how can be seen from one side or another. This is the case of this series I started in 2017, where I photographed a cloud passing over Tecate, Mexico, and then I walked across the border to Tecate, California. Both places have the same name, to rephotograph the same cloud. The images are framed with the location and time the photos of each cloud were taken. The lapse in time between photographs documents changes as the cloud formations move across the sky. I'm interested in contemplating these invisible aspects. Is the color of the sky the same on both sides? If a cloud changes its shape from one side or the other, does something similar happen when we think about migration? Is the air that we breathe the same? Are the two Tecates really two Tecates, or simply a cloud photographed in two different moments and two different places? Since I remember, every time I cross the border, I notice the air changes from one side to the other. And since I remember, the two Tecates don't feel the same, even though sometimes I forget in which Tecate I am walking. I wasn't sure if my doubt about the identity of the air was something I was purely imagining, so I went to speak with a group of chemistry researchers at the University of Baja California in Tijuana to ask if they knew of any phenomenon that could explain what I was perceiving. They told me they weren't sure, but that we could do some research. We formed a small team of 4 people and began analyzing the immediate crossing area between Tijuana and San Diego. We began by asking people who crossed regularly if they felt the air was different on either side. At first, they would say something like, "I never thought about it, but now that you're mentioning it, yeah, there's something about it. There's something different." So when we started identifying what the most prominent scents were that people could detect, myself included, on each side, in the end, we settled on 6 scents. So these are like the scents that we work in the lab. On the U.S. side, we chose McDonald's French fries, plants growing along the freeway, such as lavenders, salvias, and some native plants, and finally the scent of a new car, like plastic. On the Mexican side, we identified the scents of carne asada tacos, rotting trash, and smog. Our conclusion was that the air and all these particles we don't see actually record information about how we live our lives, the way we handle waste, how green spaces are regulated on either side, and aspects related to our diet. This is one of the ways I approach the forms in which a border can be experienced, what can be perceived once we live there. This is a project from 2019. So every time I show this piece, we use diffusers, and the scent changes every day. So one day, if you go on Wednesday, there would be probably like French fries, or the next day, trash or smog. Something similar happened to me years earlier, exactly in the beginning of my art career. In 2007, I moved to Tijuana not only to study at the arts program there, but also looking for the experience's private and local art scene. Very soon, both at the university campus and cultural venues, bars, and talks, I started to realize that everybody and everything related to contemporary art in Tijuana derived from the 19th and early 2000s art world and art scene. But once I wanted to learn more about it, there was practically no library, public collection, no archive, no to consult documents, catalogs, or books on that important period. Border art was everywhere in the memory of people, but nowhere in paper or even photographs. At the time I arrived in Tijuana to study art, border art had become a ghost. So many years later, I decided to translate this early spectral experience into one of my continuous projects. The idea began to crystallize one day when I was visiting my family in San Diego, and I found myself starting at my aunt's garage. I noticed that in this space, she kept tools, boxes of unused clothes, the Christmas tree, and objects that didn't have a place inside her home. However, they weren't considered trash. They were there on standby, waiting to be picked up again. That image started to reappear in my mind every time I thought about works, artists, events, or rumors belonging to border art. I began to think that the situation of border art history simply hasn't had a clear place inside the house, which might symbolize the art history of Mexico, for example. So this idea of storage, where objects wait, led me to think of a strategy to create an archive. In 2019, I invited students from the art department in Tijuana to start this project. The premise was to begin a study of the ways the border has been represented. For example, when we study a pre-Hispanic civilization, there are a series of elements that become characteristic or recurring in terms of aesthetics and imagery. One of the ideas was to find out which elements reappear at the border, if they exist or not, and in what form, etc. This process involved recreating fragments of works by other artists, reworking, appropriating, knowing, and recognizing elements that were in a painting, others that were part of a sculpture or an installation, facing all these images manually, even seeing what they transform into as a whole. So what we would do is to have sessions to discuss about an artist from the border, and we would recreate a fragment of some artwork through ceramics or yeah, like something that we could do from scratch, basically, to understand how those shapes were made. I decided they would be fragments because that is the way how memory works. Memory never appears as a complete image, so memory would be the trigger to activate this archive. In Atlas Western, a commission for the Museo Universitario de Arte Contemporáneo, MUAC, in Mexico City, I worked on the location of a Western film set called Cine Pueblo, located on the outskirts of Tecate, Baja California. It was primarily built to attract capital from Hollywood, given its proximity. It was only a few hours away and was presented as an idyllic location due to the unique landscape, and above all, due to the cheaper labor on the Mexican side of the border. Construction was completed in the late 70s, but by then, the Western genre was in decline. As a result, the large-scale filming originally envisioned never took place. Only a few scenes for low-budget films were shot there. Over time, the set disappeared, and today only a few traces of the place remain. I grew up about half an hour away, and something about this space left a deep impression on me. It felt like a city that was built but never inhabited. I started imagining a fictional hypothesis or a B-side to the story of why the place did not function. I thought that perhaps the gestures once performed by archetypal Western characters had integrated into everyday life, especially in male bodies. I began comparing stills from Western movies with images I saw in the news, featuring primarily male bodies, and they were basically the same. So I imagined that once these gestures migrated, they no longer needed a set to exist. The video is a reenactment in Cine Pueblo of iconic scenes from Western movies against the landscape of this place. I meticulously reenacted all the camera movements from specific scenes, but in this case without actors, without bodies, under the idea that these gestures had escaped to become part of everyday life. On the set, there are backdrops hanging around the ruins. This was an attempt to fictionalize the set itself, to fictionalize a place constructed to develop fictions. I'm interested in approaching archives as a way of proposing alternative stories and to think what possibilities I have with the information that already has been organized in a certain way to be interpreted through specific perspectives or labels. In more recent years, I began to explore another type of order archive, one related to the Chinese diaspora, which is also part of my own story. I began by visiting different archives in Baja California and California that hold information about the Chinese migration on both sides. In one of the first archives I visited, the images were fading, as if the archive itself was vanishing, disappearing them. They were images from the earliest photographic records of Chinese ships on the Pacific coast. At the same time, I was reviewing the small archive in my family. These are the only photographs left by my grandmother's brothers before leaving Mexico to the US. And this was also the starting point for creating Fong, the video that is part of the appearance. Fong is a love letter dedicated to the men in my family who disappeared during the anti-Chinese campaigns in Mexico. At some point, they went to San Francisco, California, intending to reunite with the women who stayed on the Mexican side when things changed, but that never happened. The women who stayed in Mexico, including my grandmother, changed their names to Western ones, and talking about this was forbidden until very recently. Through this letter, I write about the experience of women in my family from the Mexican side who lived through the anti-Chinese campaigns and naturalized the idea of silence as protection, that is, not speaking about the past. The process involved going to San Francisco, California, where I spent several days in the Chinatown area simply observing life through the camera, watching how people walk, the sounds, the shops, the colors, the decorations. I constantly thought about the possibility that maybe, without knowing it, I might suddenly cross paths with a family member I'll never recognize because we don't know each other. Or I thought perhaps that they had all died or maybe returned to China. However, for me, it was essential to think of these presences in that place, with the possibility of finding each other, even if only through architecture or the same streets they saw. My grandmother, who is 99 years old, was the first generation who was born in Mexico. I've been asking her how she imagines China. I used the descriptions she gave me as prompts to generate images using different AI image generators. She chose the ones that were more accurate to what she visualizes. So these are like the images that she has been choosing through our conversation. And the last, well, this is an installation view that I had, a show that I had last year called Ghost Stories in Mexico City, Proyectos Monclova. The last series continues on an ongoing installation started in 2023 of light boxes called China Affair. These signs incorporate quotes of testimonies I've gathered from second or third generation Chinese Mexican and Chinese American. Their words show how they imagine China despite never having been there themselves. These pieces put into play how speculative scenarios activate cultural memory, longing, and reconstruction. I'm not sure what my work is about. This is something others will perceive or decide, but I do know some time of starting points of the type of art I do have been borders and ghosts. Thank you.
Chantal, thank you so much. It's really great to learn about you and also your practice. You're very new to New York City. As a matter of fact,
Yes.
You began your first year of Whitney Independent Studies program, right?
Yeah.
Just over like a month ago?
A month ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how do you finding your life in New York City, first of all?
Well, it's a huge contrast coming from a small town at the border. Yeah, it's like the opposite. Yeah.
You finding your peers, your cohorts in the
Right.
ISB,
Yes.
and your wide range of teachers. How do you finding them? Are they
Amazing. No, it has been great. Yeah, it has been, I mean, it has been only a month, but yeah, it's wonderful.
And your practice seems to be so much about kind of, walking around,
Yeah.
in the city, finding kind of fragments of memories and evidence and imagination in a way.
Right.
How do you find the New York City in that regard? Do you have a time to walk around? I mean, ISB is actually right, it's on Canal Street, right? Still,
No,
they moved.
yeah,
Okay.
it's on the West Village.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's like a few blocks away from the Whitney Museum.
I see.
Yeah.
So no longer, kind of on the gateway to Chinatown.
No.
Okay. Mm. Well, interesting. I think, I was looking at your really wonderful video, Fong, title comes from your family name. It's 11 minutes long. It's, in exhibition appearance.
Yes.
And I realized that the one scene you found actually the storefront of, I think, Chinese trading company, which says Fong.
Right.
Right? So I realized that the film is perhaps kind of combinations of your archival research and also imaginations and things you found as you walk in San Francisco, Chinatown. Can you tell me a little bit about actually your practice? It's archive-based, but then, there's also imaginary community, you're kind of bringing into your film. And what is your methods, when you make a work, imagination and archive work? Can you just tell us a little bit about balancing them too?
Yeah, well, as you said, it's a combination of both things. There are always silences in archives, in public archives, but also in personal archives. And I think my work happens in those spaces of silences. I've been thinking a lot about this, especially coming from the border and the spaces in between. I'm very interested in that area where like 2 or 3 or different worlds can dialogue.
Yes.
They're not one of the other one, but they're always like mutating at some point. And in this video in Fong, what I did is I was revisiting photographies with my grandmother, but also visiting a lot of archives in La Paz, Baja California Sur, which is a place where migration from China arrived.
Right.
It was like one of the main places in Mexico. And I actually found a picture of my grandfather for the first time in that archive.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was fascinating because I never saw his face. It was the first time that I was in front of him.
Yes.
And then I immediately printed the image and showed it to my grandma.
How did you identify that's the image of your grandfather? Because you had seen some other pictures in the past? Or?
No, but by the name.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that each person in that photograph was identified with a name.
Yeah.
Okay. At the beginning of the video, you have actually drawings of ships coming in, and then you also bring in this sort of like a ghost story.
Right.
People in that part of Mexico believe, well, they never seen Chinese people before, potentially, and there's a way to identify whether the person is a ghost or not. So you brought in a lot of kind of interesting elements, visually and also, literally. How do you go about that beginning part?
Yeah, in general, I'm very interested in literature. I have a big collection of ghost stories, and I recently started reading about this genre in China, which is translated as Records of the Strange. And these are compilations of ghost stories in China. And I started noticing while going to these archives in Mexicali, which is another city at the border with the biggest Chinese community in Mexico, that a lot of documents of during the anti-Chinese campaigns were using the same words of expressions to refer to the Chinese migration. They were the same words that I read in these ghost stories. Like they were referring to these communities as the non-human beings, monsters, like beings with a lot of like weird diseases, like, and I started doing this association about how this story about Chinese or Asian migrations in Mexico were relegated to, as if it was also another ghost story in the country.
So I guess this kind of rhetoric, right? The immigrants threat to the social, public safety, public health, and that's being repeated over and over and over again, even in current time, certainly. Were you able to sort of like trace that sort of like a baseless rumor or fear against Chinese migrants within your kind of family history? Were you able to, because your grandmother is still alive, she's 99, and there must be a lot to share within your family. Do you have those kind of oral history you picked up from your own family?
Yeah, I mean, basically a lot of things that we know is through oral history. We don't have like so many documents, but I mean, in general, oral histories are what are like rebuilding this story, is also a way to reappropriate the story, right?
How do you keep track of what your grandma said? I mean, how do you go about actually working with her? Because there's one work you show, she chose certain sort of like a typical images from China, right?
Yeah.
So what is your method to work with her when you involve her memories and?
Well, we would. This type of conversations are very like recent, because as I mentioned, this was like forbidden. Like,
right.
They didn't like to talk about this because it was a traumatic experience.
Sure.
But now something happened that now she's like very interested in knowing more about, and that happens when I showed her the image of her father, the one that I found in this archive.
Sure.
And so she started to be more open about the whole history, and she started to give me a lot of details of what happened and how, and we just have like a conversation, and then a lot of different family members were also very curious about what was going on with this.
Right.
And her sister, she's 100 years old.
Oh, wow.
And she loves like talking through FaceTime. And
Oh, it's amazing. So your great-grandfather, who was pictured, and you found him, but I assume he disappeared. He moved to San Francisco.
He moved to San Francisco with my grandmother's brothers.
I see. So the kind of male side of your family,
yes,
they moved to San Francisco.
Right.
And then they disappeared.
Yes. Yeah, they lost like any type of connection or anything. Yeah.
You mentioned about kind of genre of border art, and of course actually, not knowing much of actually work by Mexican artists, who live near the border. I thought about someone like Chantal Ackerman, from the other side, a beautiful film, and made into installation. I think she shot at the Douglas, Arizona, if I remember correctly. And then, Alfred Jarr, His In the Cloud. He produced at the Insight 2000, I remember. That came with actually 1,000 balloons and music, right? So those are sort of like a little sentimental, nostalgic way to look at the border, maybe seeing through the sort of like a critical artist, but after all, they don't really have an experience living close to the border. Do you have any critique on, works treating border as a subject, but not by the artists who really had, long-lasting relationship with the site?
Yeah, well, that is something that has been in the conversation for a lot of years.
Yes.
Especially because this biennial that you mentioned, Insight,
yes,
since 1994 until 2005. So what they did is that they invited a lot of artists to come to the border and to do a project in the public space. In my opinion, I think people coming to the border, it adds to the conversation, different perspectives, but there is the discussion around that.
Well, you're deeply rooted, at the border.
Yeah.
And I think, after 2 years in New York, I guess you still return to the border, perhaps as a place to...
Well, I've been here for a month.
Yeah.
And
you have no idea.
Yes.
Yeah. But I wonder, actually, I mean, there are probably, numerous other artists, who share, with you the perspective, critical perspective of creating work from the border, about border, or histories embedded in that part of the world. I'm really curious to know what are you working on, and also how you see your, I guess, 2 years, right? Or a year or two?
A year.
Yeah, okay. It goes really fast. I wonder how that would give you a new perspective. You don't quite know yet. But maybe actually my question is, what are you working on and what you like to develop while you are here in New York?
Yeah,
Chantal?
well, I brought material with me to continue working on this history of the diaspora in Mexico. I'm doing, it's like a series of different love letters, like Fong. But yeah, a lot of my projects sometimes takes me several years to finish. Like Unfinished Business Garage, the one that I started in 2019 with the students. I keep working on that. The one that with the light boxes, it's also an ongoing project, and it's a way to keep different conversations open. I think about my work as a conversation as well, and I'm very interested in that, and to create a space where I can dialogue with students about border art, or what the history is and how they are approaching to that, or this is also a way to have conversations with people from the Chinese community at the border. So yeah, that's the way that I approach usually.
So I guess your work and your practice are kind of part of the larger constellation of, artists, perhaps Chinese diaspora artists all over the world. Have you had a kind of dialogue with actually, for example, Chinese artists elsewhere in, other parts of the world? I mean, do you have that kind of practice of networking and also, exchanging thoughts?
Yeah, well, I actually started doing that very recently. Yeah, because I started this project 2 years ago, and that opens, as I said, different conversations to different group of people. But yeah, that's something that I'm still doing right now.
Yes, yeah, I'm sure, being in New York City, I'm sure you see numerous actually Asian artists. They come from all over the world. And
Yeah.
I think that'll give you a chance to actually expand your, kind of network of thinking and also, artists and others. So it's very exciting that you're here. And it's a really beautiful, very impactful work you show in exhibition appearance. So maybe actually we can open this up. And maybe can we have questions from audience? Okay, just one question? Okay, we have time for one question. So would anyone have a question to Chantal? Yes, we have actually one hand.
Thank you very much for, I don't know if this is working, but thank you very much for your presentation. So I have a few questions. How were you able to convince your grandmother to go from harboring silence as a way of protecting herself and her family to opening up? And given that she's doing this at 99, it seems that it's particularly an important time in her life, in the scope of her life, to confront this trauma, and then to be able to do this with you and to collaborate with you in creating artwork that talks about this situation that she and other people had to live. How did you manage to do that, and how does she see her relationship with you and with the artwork?
I don't think that I convinced her. At the end, it was her decision to be more open about the experiences that she had when she was younger. I'm not really sure what happened, to be honest. It just happened. Yeah.
And how does she feel about the artwork when she's seen it?
Oh, she's just always like laughing, like, what are you doing?
Thank you.
I mean, she's very sweet, and she talks like very slow, and her pace is. And when we're talking, and I'm asking her like, how do you imagine China, or how do you think about this or that? Look, I found this. She would be like, just like, she stays in silence, and then she responds. And that's like the way she approaches, and she like, I don't know, maybe she's not sharing, I'm sure of that, like everything with me, but I really appreciate what she's able to talk with me, because now I know it's really hard.
Sure. Thank you.
One more question? Yes, please.
It's a continuation. Part of what you were saying, I'm also curious to know how or what do you imagine that happened to her, that she's so quiet about it? And if you can tell us a really quick overview about the anti-Chinese violence in Mexico and around what year that happened. Like, do you know what happened in Mexico?
Yeah, I mean, it happened, it's a very similar story to what happened in the US. They wanted to exclude the Asian communities from the country. There was a law that the intention was to not allow marriages between Mexican women and male Chinese, because that is written in one of the documents. It says something like, if this happens, we're going to be like the shame of the future in the world. And the pressure was like very intense. And what I know is that my grandfather was looking to find different opportunities for them, for the family, and they had connections in San Francisco because the community was more established, and there was communication, and so but they never returned.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Chantal.
Thank you.
It's a great way to start conference today. I also wanted to point out this is actually our first collaboration with the America Society, I think I guess many years, as a matter of fact. So I'm grateful to everyone who's involved in this, from both institutions, across from each other on Park Avenue. So I hope actually this would be a good starting point for us to work together to accomplish the goal together. So thanks again. Thank you.
Thank you.